All right, I think I'll get started. Um, so thank you all for joining us tonight. We're here to talk about the legislative audit approved by voters in 2024. I'm really excited to be joined by Jeanne Kempthorne, who's a former appellate lawyer. I'll formally introduce her later. But to introduce myself, I'm Scotia Hilla. I'm the executive director of Act on Mass. Um, and I have just a little bit of an introduction in case you're not familiar with our organization. Act on Mass is a 501(c)(4) nonprofit that was founded in 2018. Our mission is strengthening democracy in Massachusetts by recentering the voices of constituents in the lawmaking process. We're fighting for Massachusetts in which everyday people, not just the wealthy and corporations, have a say in the decisions that impact our lives. And we fight through this mission for a variety of ways, including pushing for good governance policies, monitoring the State House, and acting as kind of a watchdog. We try to strengthen grassroots advocacy through workshops and information forums like this one. And in election years like this one, we also endorse movement candidates. Um, just a little bit of housekeeping for today's webinar. We're asking that folks, if you have any comments or reactions, please put those in the chat. And or send them to our email admin@actonmass. We really welcome feedback, especially if you have thoughts on the webinar. So we appreciate that. And we will open for questions at the end. Just because we have a lot of folks and I think everybody's very interested, we're gonna limit that to 2 minutes per person, so that we have enough time for everybody. But without further ado, here's our agenda for today. So I'm going to do a quick review of the background on the audit. Then we'll switch to a Q&A with Jeanne Kempthorne. And at the end, we'll open for questions. So there will be time for questions to be addressed. Um, and if you have a question that you don't feel comfortable speaking yourself, you can put it in the chat and just say that, and I can read it. So, to start with a little bit of background on the audit, many of us have been hearing about this for years, so I thought we'd just review some about the audit. First of all, the auditor role. Many of you guys might not have known, I didn't know that the position of state auditor was created in 1849. This is a picture of just about what the city of Boston looked like at that time. As you can see that the State House was actually the tallest building in Boston, if you can believe it. So the position of state auditor was created by the legislature in 1849. And in 1855, a constitutional amendment approved by voters made it a popularly elected position. So at first, it was a position that was appointed by the legislature. Um, Now it is a popularly elected position since 1855. So, this is what Massachusetts general law clarifies for the responsibilities of the state auditor. It says the Department of the State Auditor shall audit the accounts, programs, activities, and functions directly related to the aforementioned accounts of all departments, offices, commissions, institutions, and activities of the Commonwealth, including those of districts and authorities created by the General Court and the General Court itself. Dot, 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 dot. And for such purposes, the authorized officers and employees of the Department of the State Auditor shall have access to such accounts at reasonable times, and the department may require the production of books, documents, vouchers, and other records relating to any matter within the scope of an audit. So, in summary, they're able to look at books, documents, vouchers, and records of government agencies in order to determine that they're following their mission. This statute was recently changed by the voters. Um, Many of us voted on question one in 2024. That was the question that added and the general court itself to this existing law, just to further clarify that the general court is considered a department, office, institution, or mission of the Commonwealth. How do we get here? So this discussion that we're having about the legislative audit, this has actually been going on for many years. So in 2022, former state rep and state senator Diana DiZoglio, who served in the legislature for 10 years before becoming state auditor, was elected state auditor on a campaign that promised to audit the legislature. So that was one of her campaign promises. Um, when she began serving as auditor, she attempted to audit the legislature, and the Attorney General found that the auditor did not have the legal authority to audit the legislature. That was in 2023. Um, and so Auditor Zaglio thought to change the law. She took the question to the voters. And in 2024, all of us had the chance to weigh question one on our ballot, whether or not the state auditor should have the authority to audit the legislature. The question passed. It won every city and town in Massachusetts. It passed with 72% of the vote. And what we've been seeing since then has been delay, a lot of legal quagmire that has been hard to sort through. Legislative leaders refused to comply with the audit, citing that it's unconstitutional. Um, the auditor attempted to take it to court, but because she's a constitutional officer, has to be represented by the Attorney General. The Attorney General, throughout most of 2025, declined to take a side, which meant that the initiative could not proceed to court. And in 2026, the auditor filed a lawsuit with the SJC directly for the right to hire her own attorney. And the AG actually did take a side in this dispute, siding with the legislature. And anyway, we'll talk about it. But long story short, the audit remains stalled. I'm going to go briefly into this recent legislation that has happened just since the beginning of the year, litigation, I mean, and then we will move to the Q&A. So this is new just in the last month. In February, the auditor petitioned a single justice of the SAC to allow her to do two things. One, compel the legislature to comply with the audit. So compel the legislature to produce the books, to produce the records that her audit team was looking for. And she asked for permission to appoint a special attorney general, so someone to represent her in court that was not the attorney general, since the attorney general had declined to represent her up until this point. In February 19th, the Attorney General intervened on behalf of the legislature, asking that single justice of the Supreme Court to toss the auditor's lawsuit on the grounds that the auditor had bypassed the Attorney General, that the Attorney General is the only entity in the state that is able to represent constitutional officers in court. On March 4th, that single justice, Judge Delilah Wendland, rejected demand number two of the auditor's complaint. So she said, I'm not going to appoint a special AG, saying that there was no basis for being the Supreme Judicial Court being able to appoint an AG. But this week, literally today, it was announced that the AG's motion to strike the auditor's lawsuit will be heard by the full SJC. So a whole year and a half after we have passed the audit at the ballot, finally, this question is going to be heard by the Supreme Judicial Court. Obviously, this is a whole mess of legal back and forth, and I'm not a lawyer, which is why I'm so grateful to be joined today by Jeanne Kempthorne, who is a former appellate lawyer. I have her bio here. She's a retired attorney and mediator. In her 40-year legal career, Jeanne practiced as a civil litigator at the firm Hill and Barlow before joining the U.S. Attorney's Office as a federal prosecutor, where she served as chief of the Public Corruption Unit, among other roles. She later served as State Ethics Commissioner, Chief of Appeals, and General Counsel for the Berkshire District Attorney's Office, and a Special Assistant District Attorney in the Suffolk District Attorney's Office. A longtime good government activist, Kempthorne co-authored the Massachusetts Legislature, Democracy in Decline, 2021, and the 2025 update, Democracy in Decline, Denial and Delay. In 2025, she was invited to testify before the State Senate Subcommittee on the constitutionality of the law, clarifying that the state auditor has the power to audit the legislature. Welcome, Jeanne.
Thank you. Glad
So
to be here.
so happy to have you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can open my list of questions. This is when we're going to do the prepared Q&A. As a reminder, if you have comments, please put them in the chat, and we will open for questions following the Q&A.
Right, Scotia. Shoot.
Awesome. First, I'd like to ask you, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in the good government work that you're doing now?
I came out of the U.S. Attorney's Office in 2003 when the Republicans took over the Department of Justice, and the way we practiced in that office changed in ways that I wasn't entirely comfortable with. And I got involved, very involved with Common Cause. And so that was the beginning. I spent 14 years with Common Cause and was on the state board. And then I was also on the state, not at the same time, I was also on the State Ethics Commission and looking hard at issues of abuse of positions of trust and unwarranted privileges. And I also got involved in the um, activism around holding Finneran accountable
Mm.
for the, you know, terrible gerrymandering that the poor NAACP had to challenge in federal court every 10 years. Anyway, so I got very involved in that and on and on.
All
And
right.
then PDM, and then got involved in a legislative reform working group, et cetera. I wasn't expecting this. Go ahead.
Um, Sure. So I touched upon the creation of the audit position. I understand that for the testimony that you did on the audit, you did a little bit more research into the creation of the audit and how that pertains to some of the questions at hand today. Can you walk us through that a little bit?
I mean, one thing I'd like to emphasize and maybe highlight in your presentation is the constitutional amendment made the state auditor a constitutional officer. So I think one of the first mistakes was looking at only the statute for the powers of the state auditor, because, like all constitutional offices, it has inherent powers. And it was expressly the view of the committee that made recommendations, which were accepted, about how the state auditor position should be handled, that it should be independent um, from the legislature, that they saw even in its brief history, 4 years by the time the Constitutional Convention, um, they realized how important it was. This SJC has said the legislature can expand the role of the state auditor. It can't restrict it. And yet, over time, the legislature has done so
Mm.
and has usurped some of the position, some of the traditional role of the state auditor, for example, as the chief fiscal officer. And it has, purported itself to take on the function of the auditor with its own audits. So, yeah, by and large, there hasn't been a lot of conflict until recently. The legislature did allow audits at various points of itself, and this fight over the issue of the scope of the audit. Does it include programming and functions and performance? It's the legislature that has always taken the view that their audits and the Chapter 11, Section 12 audits that apply to the auditor do encompass performance.
Mm.
So it's only with respect to themselves that they are balking at that. And, without going too far afield, this current fight was framed as about the legislature resisting any performance audit as violative of its separation of powers, its autonomy, its right to run itself as it sees fit. So that's really what the fight was about. The legislature framed it as a separation of powers argument.
Right.
They never really explained how it's separation of powers, and people who have testified in support of that position, for example, Dr. King at the Kennedy School, misquoted famous aphorisms. Uh, for example, he said that the power to audit is the power to destroy. In fact, that is a misquote of Justice John Marshall in the case McCulloch versus Maryland, in which he said the power to tax is the power to destroy. It's very, very hard to see how the power to audit infringes on core legislative functions, much less has the power to destroy the legislature. So that's really the nub of the issue. I would say no one has properly framed that separation of powers argument to any kind of legal standard.
Yeah. Well, that goes right into my next question. I mean, so much of the debate around this issue has hinged on this separation of powers issue and discussion of the core functions of the legislator and the auditor. So, by the legislators telling the auditor performing an audit of the legislature would infringe on those core functions of their legislative work. Can you just walk us through, for the uninitiated, what the core functions of the auditor and the legislature technically are?
Well, let's back up a tiny bit, Scotia, just to talk about, what does separation of powers really mean? I think it's better to start with that first issue. And it does not mean that the branches of government, the judiciary, the executive, and the legislature are hermetically sealed off one from another. It does not mean that. It has always been the intention and it has always been the practice that there were checks and balances and there were interactions between the legislature and the judiciary and the executive and the legislature. That's always been the case. And there were always some sort of controls on each other. For example, the legislature funds the other branches of government. The SJC can decide that certain actions are ultra vires, in other words, beyond the power of the other branches. They can rule that statutes are unconstitutional. There's a variety of ways in which the various agencies of the executive interact with the legislature and vice versa. So they've never been hermetically sealed. What it comes down to, separation of powers, is twofold, two major kinds of inquiry. One is, has one branch improperly delegated its core function to some agency or board? And essentially, it's an improper delegation of its own obligations. And that is one separation of powers issue that you sometimes see litigated, that something was an improper delegation of, say, rulemaking that went too far, that it has to really be legislation. So that's one. The other is a usurpation or an encroachment of core functions, one of the other. It doesn't mean, complete divorce of activities. Let me give you an example. The legislature codifies rules of practice in the courts. Rules, a word the legislature is taking great attachment to right now, saying we get to make our rules. It's funny, they feel that they can make the rules for the court.
Interesting.
Yeah. There's a lot of what's good for the goose is not good for the gander in their argument. It's not coherent. So it has to do with core legislative functions. What are the core legislative functions of the legislature? Appropriation. They have the power of the purse. And as you know, you cannot via ballot question force the legislature to appropriate money.
Right.
That's one of the things that the Attorney General has to look for when she or he certifies a question for the ballot. Um, the uh, another thing that they have the obligation to do is, to develop legislative policy and enact laws and, actions ancillary to that. I mean, how they go about, obtaining research, et cetera, et cetera. That's on them. But the job is, to pass laws. Um, the state auditor, used to be the chief fiscal officer until 1922, when the legislature took away a key function of the auditor and developed an office of the comptroller, which took away a huge piece of what the state auditor used to do. So now the state auditor, now, by the way, I mean, this may have been something that the auditor acquiesced in. I don't know that there was a battle over that, but this issue of core functions and then what happens to them and who's encroaching on whom, who's zooming whom, to quote Aretha Franklin, the legislature has done its share of taking away core functions from the auditor over the years. The last time the legislature was fully audited by the auditor, as I understand it, was in 1922. That was also the year that the Office of the Comptroller was established, as if my memory is correct on that. So that's how you think about it. So how does the audit interfere with core legislative functions? I mean, what does the audit consist of? The audit, you've talked about what the statute says, but what are her inherent, requirements? What does she do? And what does she say she wants to do? I mean, it's a review. If you look at the legislature's own description of what an audit is, it's to audit the accounts, programs, activities, and functions of all departments, offices of the Commonwealth. So she went in and said, yeah, that's what I want to do. That's what I want to do. And they said, oh, no, hold the phone. That's too much because that interferes with our core legislative functions. They never really explained how that could be the case or would be the case, but they said, no, financial audit only. So she, over the course of all this long period of correspondence, limited the scope of the audit. And she said, look, we're just going to do the financials. I want the balance forward line. I want to see procurement stuff. And I want to see the NDAs, which she had run on. Mm. And, what happened in that period of time is starting in February of a year ago, she tried to have a sit-down meeting, the auditor, with the legislature, with the leadership of the legislature to say, this is what I want to do, and this is how I want to go about it, an orderly process. And what happened instead is Mariano did not even respond. And Spilka wrote a letter, at least she wrote a letter, I give her credit for that, wrote a letter saying, yeah, no, thank you. Mm. And, they've never spelled out how it is that an audit, which is essentially saying, and is done, all over the Commonwealth. I mean, zillions of audits are done, and basically looks at the financials, looks at how they spend money, looks at whether or not they've got proper controls in place, looks at whether they are complying with what are called generally accepted accounting standards, which is also used in the federal auditing programs. I mean, this isn't some, crazy off the wall approach. She wants to use the Yellow Book, the GAAS guidelines on how to conduct an audit. And they have completely stonewalled her.
Right.
Now, she did issue a little mini audit, before the ballot question was done, and made some recommendations and said that there were some irregularities in what she was able to review with zero cooperation. So it's not as if there isn't reason to think that the legislature wouldn't benefit from some professional guidance on how they should be conducting the business of running the legislature.
Sure. And so when you're talking about the business of running the legislature, we're referring to the legislature's budget for running itself, right? So,
Procurement,
paying staff, procurement, who brings the food into the cafe, that kind of thing.
well, bigger than that, computer systems,
Okay.
um, yeah, their own financial management of the legislature itself. So it has nothing to do with the content of legislation. It has nothing to do, I've heard speech and debate clause. It has nothing to do with the speech and debate clause, which gives legislators immunity for statements made in the course of their duties from libel, etc. So they are immune from any kind of uh, civil liability, criminal liability associated with their statements made during speech and debate. Okay, does that
Yeah.
give you a little bit of a feel? I mean,
Yeah.
about the historical arc of this, which is that, the state auditor's role, which should have inherent duties apart from the statute, which is where I think the AG's office got off on the wrong foot 3 years ago or 4 years ago, completely got off on the wrong foot, looking only at the statute.
So you're
Instead,
saying there are because the auditor is a constitutional officer, there are inherent powers in the Constitution that go to the auditor, and the AG had perhaps erred in her 2023 decision in focusing simply on the statute that defines the auditor's role. You're saying that there,
that predated the constitutional the making that elevating that office to a constitutional status.
okay, so the distinction is in 1849, the auditor position was created by statute.
Correct.
And that is the, text that I shared where it talks about who they can audit and what they can audit. And then in 1855, that was elevated to a constitutional status, which means that there are inherent powers, if I'm understanding.
That's right. It also meant, of course, you're right. The legislature had created that office with the power of appointment for itself.
Okay, so the
And that
first auditor was appointed by the legislature.
and then that was stripped away, and very expressly so. It happens to be the head of that committee, the commission that looked at that, was Henry Bishop from Lenox. And he was very clear. He said, in the short period, it's proven to be very important. And we do not think this should be a committee of the legislature. We do not believe that the legislature should have power over the state auditor, that this is a power should be reserved to the people who have the supreme power. And he actually said that.
Huh.
It's the people with the supreme power, and therefore the auditor should answer to the people.
Okay. So since then, it's been a popularly elected position.
Yeah, I'd like to make one more footnote because you may not ask this, but I think it's really an important point that may not otherwise come out. The legislature has, in fact, notwithstanding this constitutional history, created committees within the legislature, the post-audit and oversight committees, which look at the state auditor's audits, but also themselves have subpoena power to conduct audits, to demand books and records. So, it is an encroachment, or at least a duplication of the inherent power of the auditor. Why are we paying for this to be done twice?
I see.
I mean, why are we paying for that? They're not supposed to be. I mean, I'm not even going to say it's unconstitutional, because so what? The auditor should still be able to audit. I think the public should question why this is necessary. But how about the incredible disingenuousness of the legislature to say, hands off, that's, we've got to keep these very strict walls between functions when they themselves have created a statute that allows them to act like an auditor. And by the way, they include the judiciary, they include the executive branch. They give themselves the power to audit the other branches of government,
Hmm.
including program effectiveness. To me, that statute completely stops them from making this argument.
Has
How
that
did they
been
get to
raised
do that?
before?
Pardon?
Has that been raised before?
By me at the hearing. They
Okay.
were dumb silent, and there were a lot of questions, but not on that. It's
Yeah, interesting.
unanswerable. It's unanswerable. When you read the statute, it's just shocking what they claim they can do vis-a-vis the judiciary and the executive branches,
Hmm.
including subpoena records.
Yeah. I know that's been an issue raised by the auditor as well, that, they reserve audit power over the executive branch and judiciary, yet deny it to the auditor.
Yeah, well, I had said it a year ago in the hearing. So, in any
Right.
event, but the statute is really kind of shocking when you read it because she has not asked, the state auditor has not asked to do all that. And she has repeatedly said that she is restricting the audit initially to those three areas, which are financial. They're financial.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's really no argument. And in fact, they just are silent. You ask legislators, oh, they're just wringing their hands and clutching the pearls over separation of powers. But in fact, they cannot articulate the argument because there really isn't one.
Yeah.
It's really, there's just not much there.
Interesting.
Uh, yeah. I'll
So
tell you
what,
what does raise a separation of powers issue, and that is the mess we're in now with the litigation.
I see.
So there is a real problem because the court is very, very leery about telling the legislature what it can and can't do.
Hmm.
A lot of questions that you might like answers to, the court will leave to the political process for fear of overstepping its role and doing the very thing, encroaching on the legislature. So we're really in a mess. I do believe that Justice Wendland, I'm sure this issue doesn't come up that much. The
Swipe
AG,
left.
sorry, the the AG doesn't frequently run into this problem where it's one branch of or one constitutional office against another branch of the government. Usually the AG is either um, defending state actors or it's going after private parties.
Gotcha. That was actually a question that I had also on my list. So my understanding is that the reason why the auditor has not had access to court or been able to bring this issue to a lawsuit is because the attorney general is the one that has to represent constitutional officers. But she would,
Have to. I believe the judge actually has made a mistake. I mean, the attorney general has to pick a side.
okay,
And I mean, to make the argument that, you don't get to go to court at all because the AG has chosen one side is just plainly wrong. And there's lots of precedent to that effect. I think maybe, I don't know, because I haven't seen all the papers. I haven't seen any of the briefing. Maybe there wasn't any briefing to show that there's plenty of precedent for the single justice to appoint or the SJC, the full SJC, either one, to appoint counsel for the party the AG thinks is wrong.
okay. So what would, normally occur in a situation like this? You said that, a situation where one constitutional officer is attempting a lawsuit against another entity of the government is extremely rare. But in that case, the AG, who represents the state in litigation, picks one side or another, and normally another attorney would be appointed. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
And Do you have any speculation for why the Attorney General has refused to appoint a special AG? I mean,
Again, I
that
mean,
started, right?
she's new in the job, and probably a lot of people in that office haven't done, seen this much.
Yeah,
But the case law is out there. I mean, from the SJC, the case law is out there. It said it would be farcical for one side not to be represented. That's not my word. That's the SJC's word, farcical. And of course
interesting.
it would be. And they have, she said, well, there's no statutory authority for this. They have looked at Chapter 12, Section 26, which says that they can appoint a special AAG when the Attorney General is not available. And they said, well, this is an instance when she's not available. I mean, they're not available if they're representing the other side.
I
And so they've
see.
looked to that, but they have also said, again, inherent power. The SJC has the inherent power to appoint counsel in a situation like this. They don't need the permission of the legislature to appoint counsel in a situation like this. You see, the legislature has this inflated view of its hegemony over everything that happens.
Mm.
And it's just not right. I mean, the court has inherent power to appoint this. And Wendlandt is new, relatively new, and it doesn't happen a lot. So I think, sadly, maybe there wasn't adequate briefing, but briefing can be done. There are cases that have
Yeah,
done.
and I saw that there was also a um, op-ed from a former justice of the Supreme Judicial Court who said this is a shut and dry case. There should be a special attorney general appointed.
Absolutely. Bob
Yeah.
Cordy uh, used to be at the U.S. Attorney's Office again, another one who, went from the U.S. Attorney's Office over to that bench. I mean, he's absolutely right. This is actually not a hard issue. She just made a mistake. We all do.
Okay. I want to talk about some of the correspondence between the Attorney General's office and the auditor because that obviously ate up most of last year. Um, if I the Attorney General has claimed that she supports the audit. She continues to. She says that she voted for it. She claims that it's not her office that's blocking the proceedings, but that the auditor's office has refused to answer basic questions about the scope of the audit and the legal strategy that she will take to the SJC. Um, uh,
Maybe you need to.
I just muted. So the auditor's office, in response, claims that the AG has not committed to defending their office over the legislature. Do you have a read? Why are those two things connected? Can you help us understand that?
I have read all the correspondence. I read it a year ago, and I've looked at it again, and it is almost sad to read. There's no question that the state auditor has said specifically what she intends to do. The AG has asked her a series of really inexperienced, I mean, I don't know, I want to be respectful, just hypothetical questions, asking her, you know, frankly, silly questions about the future, and saying, well, the court will want to know this. Well, the answer is to the court. And I mean, this is the answer. Well, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. That's not what's before the court. We've been shut out completely. And that's the answer. So she says she wants to do it. Again, this is more pearl clutching and fear based non decision making. I think she's afraid to do anything. It does happen rarely that you're in this kind of a battle, but there's no question that the auditor has repeatedly said, "This is the scope. This is what I want. I have been shut out completely. Mariano hasn't responded. Spilka has shut me out. I mean, I can't even start the audit. I mean, that should have been enough to say, all right, we go in and say, look, they're just shutting the door. And anything that goes on, I mean, the court could appoint a master. There's a bunch of things the court could have done to help deal with the issues as they go forward. But you can't lay it all out in the beginning, and it's absurd to ask for that. But she answered as fully as one could expect. I
The
can't answer
attorney,
hypothetical
the auditor.
questions. I'm telling you what I'm intending to do. I'm telling you the specific areas I'm looking into. What more do you need? So, yeah, and she wanted her every legal theory. And I mean, it's like, that's your job. That's your job. What are
That
you
was something
doing?
I thought when I was reading it, isn't if the correspondence going on is about, bringing a lawyer on board, isn't it the job of the lawyer's team to come
Of
up
course.
with the legal arguments?
Of course. Of course. And I think what's very sad here, Scotia, and if you want to do this with more questions, but I think what's very sad, because I'm looking at the time, is that a year ago, if Andrea Campbell had been a little more seaworthy, if she had her sea legs, she could have negotiated this better.
Mm,
And if she ran into the same, complete closed door brick wall that the auditor ran into, it might have helped her understand the problem better. But she didn't do that. I don't have any sense of, we don't have correspondence between her and the legislature. But just looking at the correspondence from one side, which is all we have released, the the legislature has not done what the state auditor did, which was to release all the correspondence. They
sure.
have released none of it. Uh, so we're kind of guessing, but my guess is that the same kind of fear-based, tentative, sort of scared approach to discussion about the scope and the legal theories probably infected her ability to act as a go-between and a negotiator to get this thing resolved a year ago. And now we really do have a separation of powers problem.
I see.
Yeah, we really do, because you know the auditor is looking for a motion to compel. So what is that going to be, an order? Well, she's named individuals. Okay, that's a big improvement over naming the whole legislature. But yeah, it's still problematic because, let's quote Justice John Marshall accurately again, although some say it's an apocryphal statement. He issued a decision in the Cherokee case involving the state of Georgia, saying no, the state of Georgia can't rip off the Cherokee Nation. And Andrew Jackson said, Justice Marshall has made his decision. Now let him enforce it. So this is the problem, is that the court loses credibility and the court loses status if it issues orders that the legislature ignores. It's a real vulnerability in our system, which
And
is
you
that
think
it
that's a
assumes,
risk here?
yeah, that they issue an order and it's ignored. It's a
Mm,
real issue. And they don't want to lose prestige. It's not a meaningless thing because the court doesn't have an army and it can't force it. And our whole system really does hinge on all the players acting in good faith. And frankly, I don't think the legislature is acting in good faith.
well, that could sum up the last 50 years. Um, Thank you so much for your time, Jean. I think we'll take some questions from the audience. I see that we have had some questions in the chat. I think how we'll do this is I would like to ask folks to raise their hand and ask your question. Um, Go on mute and ask your question. You have 2 minutes to do so, if you can. And if you prefer to just put your question in the chat, just please indicate that you'd like it read because otherwise I don't know which ones to address. Do we have a raised hand for someone that wants to ask a question?
Um,
Yeah, go ahead. Thank you,
Tony,
Tony.
my question really is, isn't it the job of the AG to act for the people, not for the legislature? I just think that, and just for a comment, just a side comment, Mariano said the other day in a commentary on TV that, well, if we give her that rule, she can decide what to audit. And I thought that was kind of funny because that's exactly what she does. I mean, she gets to say, these are the things I want to audit. And he didn't think that was right at all. He wants to control the audit. Anyway, my question was, isn't she supposed to act for the people?
She is supposed to she doesn't quote represent the people, but she's supposed to take the public interest and public policy into account. I mean, that should be the basis of her deciding who's right, as well as the law. All right.
Yep.
I mean, she has to apply the law in a fair-minded and
Mm,
fair way. Um, I mean, nobody here is disinterested, right? The AG, like the court, has a budget, and it's the legislature that pays it. So
ah,
nobody's truly disinterested,
yeah.
but they are supposed to be acting in the public interest and under the rule of law and subject to the Constitution.
Mm, thank you.
Thank you. So I'm gonna go in order. I saw Henry first, then I'm gonna read Gail's question. Then I'll go to Frank, Bill, and then I just saw that we got another question in the chat. And thank you, Tony, for keeping your question brief.
Thanks, Jane. So I'm thinking of what action can we try to take? How about trying to get Andrea Campbell out of office? And what about in the Speaker's District and in Mariano's district? Are there people who are as furious as I am that they are the impediments to this moving forward?
Henry, nice to have you on. I'm glad you joined. What I would say is that each and every person has to really be direct and publicly direct with their own rep and their own senator. Henry, I know, Henry is also in the Berkshires with me and our local paper. I'll try to be brief in my answer, but our local paper just interviewed all 4 members of the Berkshire delegation. And here's what all of them said. Each of them said the same thing. They said, oh, we're in favor of the audit, but we're very worried about separation of powers. And I said to the Berkshire Brigade, and Frank knows this, fine, let's debate. Host a debate. I'll do it. And yeah, there were no takers. They can't articulate it. So I think you're on safe ground confronting them and say to them, okay, separation of powers, explain it. Explain
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, thank you, Jean. I think that's a great point. And I think, to your point about the limits of the court as kind of a relief mechanism here, one mechanism that we the people always have is holding our representatives accountable. And they are always political consequences for things like this. So, by using our power as citizens, that's definitely one way that we can approach this. I think I said I would read Gail's question and then go to Frank. So Gail said in the chat, um, will the SJC rule to appoint a special AG?
Well, so far they haven't, but I'm telling you they should. So far, the single justice, now she has punted the whole case up to the full court, and that just happened today. The AG has moved to dismiss the litigation. And yeah, I mean, I think that the AG has made a bunch of misjudgments, and it's not that unusual because this is such an uncommon circumstance. I can't predict. You never can predict with courts. It's all, they're individuals.
Right. And do we have any sense of when that decision will be made? Is that the sort of thing that would be quick, or we expect it to drag on?
Well, again, you can't, they're pretty good in that court, and they do actually pretty much hold themselves, except in very, very important cases, to their own deadlines. But you're usually looking at a year for full briefing. I would hope it would be less. Because there's no fact issues here, really. It's very much on the papers, and hopefully they can expedite it.
Okay. So I've got Frank and Bill, and then I have two questions from the chat, and then Jean, another
Yeah.
Jean.
Jeanne, do you think it's kind of a third rail kind of a situation, but could the auditor examine the stipend system? They'd be very afraid if she did so, but do you think she has the ability to do that?
Well, the stipends are in fact a matter of public record, Frank. Um, the comptroller pays out the stipends, and they are a matter of statute. You see, the legislature pays itself, and it's not constrained by the constitutional limit on base pay with respect to the stipends. So they've ballooned. So it's not like the NDAs, which are secret. They're secret. I mean, there's no way you and I can know what circumstances gave rise to the NDA, how much was paid in exchange for an NDA that we paid for. We don't have any way to get at that. The stipends, we know who's getting paid, and we know what they're getting paid. So that's not really going to solve the problem of transparency. The stipend issue, and I don't want to go off on that, but that's about, whether our rank and file is working for us.
Right. Yeah, and just for those that might not be familiar, Jean and Frank are referring to legislative stipends that are paid to leadership on top of pay, which now 75% of House and Senate members receive part of their pay from leadership, which can be called loyalty pay. And there's a ballot question on this to reform the system this year. I think Bill's next.
This is a legal question, not a legal question, but a political question. Where is Governor Healy in all this, and wouldn't her moral suasion help?
Well, you got to laugh. She says every time she's asked, I'm in favor of the audit. I voted for the audit. And that's all she says.
Got it.
Got it?
Yeah, I got it.
We had a question from the chat from Frustrated Voter, who also referred to the governor. Isn't it the governor's job as executive to enforce rulings?
No. I mean, not unless there's a criminal thing. No, it's not.
The attorney general would enforce that.
Well, what is the remedy if the court issues an order to compel, which is what Diana has asked for? Just said, granted, motion to compel. The audit has to go forward. And Mariano says, make me. Now what? He could be held in contempt because the suit is brought against him. But good luck with that. Talk about a constitutional crisis.
Yeah. Okay, one more question from the chat, and then I'll take Jean's question, and then I think that'll be it because we're almost at the hour. From April Nichols, could you talk a bit about the intended outcome of the audit as proposed? What would be the benefit of it to us, the residents of Mass, if this audit were to take place? What are we missing, basically, without it?
The legislature, you need to know, has shrouded itself almost completely from public view. You should know, if you don't already, that 3 speakers of the House in a row were convicted. And some of what, like Sal Damazzi, was over procurement. This is, and there have been very serious investigations that for one reason or another didn't go all the way to an indictment, like 75 State Street. So there's plenty for us to know about. It's not like the legislature operates in open. On the NDAs, I mean, that is what got Diana running for state auditor. When I was on the State Ethics Commission, I was very concerned about NDAs. We have a lot of people. There's a lot of sexual harassment. There's a lot of abuse, bad behavior in the legislature. They don't police their own people. And if someone sues, like a staffer sues, as Diana had done for harassment, they settle it with a non-disclosure agreement as a condition. I cannot fathom how that's in the public interest. And we don't even know the terms of the settlement, because that's the whole point of the non-disclosure, is the public will not know what the terms of the settlement are. How is that legal? So
Yeah.
that's what we benefit.
Yeah, another thing, I wish we had time to talk about this more, but one argument that the legislators often bring up against the audit is that they already subject themselves to a financial audit, which is done by an outside private firm. And what I find funny about that, I mean, first of all, the audit, if you guys look it up, it's got like 8 lines. It says how much they spent and it says how much they got in, and it doesn't say anything about what they spent it on. Um, but what I find funny about that is that the contract by which they used to, contract that outside firm to do an audit is also something that we can't see. We don't know how much they paid a private firm to do that audit. We don't know how that firm got the contract. So these are things that you don't have to worry about when, we have a publicly elected auditor doing auditing on behalf of the people.
The very fact that they're doing that is a waste of our money.
Yeah.
It's not real checks and balances. They are hiring the people that are, they're paying them to do the audit.
Right.
That is not checks and balances.
Right.
I mean, you can have no assurance that you're getting the complete picture. And if you look it up, and by the way, the most recent one you're going to get is 2023. Okay?
Right.
All right? That's what's up there. Mariano said 2024 was up. No, he's wrong. It's not. And again, this is duplicative. How is the legislature doing that? It's not legislating.
Yeah. All right. One more question from Jean. I know we're a little bit over time, but I said you could have it. And
We
then
started late. We started late, Scotia.
Hi, Jean. This is Jean.
Hi, Jean.
Do other states have an analogous position, constitutionally or statutorily situated independent auditor who can evaluate the performance of the legislature?
I can tell you that the state auditor says yes. I have not personally researched it. But she says it's not at all uncommon. But it doesn't really matter because we do have a constitutional officer who has that power. Our state constitution exists. It's existed for over 150 years with this provision. And this is that, so in other words, you don't do a comparative analysis at the point we're at now. But in fact, people are interested to know. And she says, yes, this is very common.
And if I'm right, there's also a similar entity that operates at the national level, right?
Right.
Congress gets audited or
Yep. Yes, there is.
great. All right. I am concluding our webinar. Thank you so much, Jean, for joining us. Thank you to everyone for participating today. Yeah, we're so grateful to have your questions and your thoughts on this. Just want to note, if you're interested in learning more about our organization, Act on Mass, 2 ways to keep in touch with us. You can sign up for our weekly newsletter, The Saturday Scoop, where we write about issues like this. You can also check out our website, actonmass.org. And I'll note that Jean and I both serve on Kroll, the Coalition to Reform Our Legislature. So I'll put that website in the chat as well. Thank you guys so much. Hope
Thank
you have a
you.
nice evening.
Okay, what do you think?